Elon Musk is known for making big claims that most of the time don't even end up being true. And this time he stated global oil demand will start decreasing in the next 5 years. Is that true? Elon certainly thinks so, but an important thing to note here is not everyone agrees with him. And later in the video, I'll also get into whether it's true or not and how likely his prediction actually is. But so far, Elon's fully convinced that we won't be using as much oil anymore by the end of this decade. At the same time, though, he could intentionally or unintentionally be saying this to drive up the stock price of his electric car company Tesla. But that doesn't mean that he thinks that the oil demand will start decreasing immediately. He says that it's actually going to grow for 5 years, hit its peak in 2028, and then it's going to taper off. So here's what happened. A bank CEO claimed that oil is going to keep being necessary for the next 50 years, but Elon obviously disagreed. Here's what he said. True, there will be a long tail of usage, but it will peak long before then. Peak oil demand probably happens within the next 5 years. But as I mentioned before, not everyone agrees with the Tesla CEO. In fact, an oil industry analyst disagrees with this claim. Anas Al-Haji, an oil analyst and market commentator, quickly disputed Elon's prediction.
Companies, including LNG companies, etc. So the exchange of information is extremely important in this case. The problem is we have different definitions, we have different.
He stated he has evidence to prove that the oil demand will not be peaking in the next 5, 10, or even 20 years. He also stated that just to make sure the demand for oil stays the same as it is right now, the world's going to need 70 million EVs on the roads. And considering how many cars are sold every year, that's just not something that's going to be possible. Because as countries get richer and richer, and as the population grows, oil is going to be used in a whole lot of other stuff. And it's not just going to be used to power transportation.
As academia is about, right? And in business, you need to get all the information to make an informed decision for your investment. So whether you are talking about investment, you are talking about academia, or you are talking about policy making.
So unless everything completely moves on to renewables, it's just not something that's going to happen. But hey, Elon didn't make these claims out of nowhere. He does have one trick up his sleeve, the International Energy Agency report. The International Energy Agency, also known as the IEA, has actually predicted something similar to what Elon Musk has said.
I have a lot of analysts that kind of look in the rearview mirror instead of looking at the front windscreen.
What do you mean by that?
This has very frequently been why people have underestimated Tesla.
The report claims that the oil demand is going to level off around 2025, and then it's going to start declining. And it's going to start declining by the middle of the century, so we do have a lot of time before that starts happening. The report stated that because of today's policy settings, for the first time ever, the demand for oil is going to plateau. But the report also attributed this development to electric cars. The report stated that the rising sales of EVs mean that the demand is going to level off, and it's going to keep declining in the years to come. And this is with keeping things consistent. The report claims if countries work towards climate change, if they actually take it seriously, then this decline could happen even sooner, and it could also be even steeper. Because here's the thing, many governments have already started banning the sales of gas cars by the year 2035 or earlier. And at the same time, if not EVs, folks are buying more hybrids and plug-in hybrids than ever. So these cars aren't gulping gas like cars used to, and there's the fact that a lot of work is being done in the field of synthetic fuels as well. So if that proves to be fruitful, then the oil demand could really fall even more steadily. And this is extremely surprising because it proves this one thing, that Elon's not talking out of his butt right now.
It's really varied quite a bit over time. So these days, it's probably 80, 85 hours a week.
Usually, Elon is in the habit of saying things that don't make sense. He's even gonna just get up and make facts of his own. And while many people do disagree with this claim of his as well, it's still backed by significant research. So no, maybe he wasn't doing this to drive up the stock price. Maybe he does actually think that this is something that's gonna end up happening. The report takes 3 scenarios in mind: conservative, middle ground, and extreme. The extreme scenario is the most ideal one as well. In this situation, it's assumed that by the year 2050, all emissions will be eliminated. Still, to be honest, this is something that not even the IEA thinks will happen. But just because all of this is happening doesn't mean that oil is just not going to be used anymore. There's certainly going to be a lot of it that's going to keep being used. And at the same time, developing nations will also use a lot of oil because it's constantly trying to revert to renewables. But yes, the demand is probably going to decline, or is it? There's more to the picture. All right, we've talked about the IEA and we've talked about Elon Musk.
Sonic velocity So when it's in vacuum, it has to, obviously you can't use aero surfaces. You have to use nitrogen jets to.
Both have their reasons, but there are still a lot of other factors to consider when talking about something like this, so let's do that. In the short term, China's slowdown has kept the demand subdued, but that's something that's going to change soon. As China starts getting back to work again, it's going to need oil, and it's going to need a lot of oil. In fact, the Saudi Aramco CEO Amin H. Nasser feels that the world just won't have the capacity to deal with this shift, and he predicts the price of crude oil to rise in the coming few months.
Over by 2030 in terms by eliminating the liquid burning in the kingdom. So we will have ample capacity. The issue is the demand growth and the decline that we're seeing.
He also stated that while production does have some capacity, it just doesn't have a lot. So here's something interesting. So we talked short term, now let's talk long term. Saudi Aramco already produces 10% of the world's oil. It can pump 12 million barrels of crude oil per day. But the CEO of the company has now stated that the company is looking to increase that by another million barrels per day. While in the short run demand might increase, it's not worth it to invest so much capital into increasing production even more. So this means that at least the folks over at the world's biggest oil company are fully convinced that the oil demand isn't going to taper off anytime soon. But at the same time, I wouldn't get too optimistic if I were them. The world is going green, kinda. Just Google net zero 2050. You're going to see a lot of news about how companies and countries are pledging to go net zero emissions by the middle of the century.
Comedy illegal, which is not cool.
We've experienced a little bit of that.
I mean, Chappelle, like what the, I mean, try to shut down Chappelle? Come on, man. That's crazy.
Most recently, the UK and the Chinese computer manufacturer announced their plans for net zero. Companies like Microsoft are already doing something like this as well. And as appliances get more efficient, per capita energy usage has also started to decline. So that's all great news, but as with all things, there's a catch. Net zero doesn't mean no emissions, it just means that those emissions are going to be offset by something else.
So we ended up making a bunch of electric smart cars for Daimler. And then over time, we actually extended that into an electric A/B class.
So either the company is going to protect a forest somewhere or something like that. Even in the most ideal of scenarios, which is basically net zero, the oil demand isn't going to be low. It's going to be extremely high.
It's so part of it is just we're operating on things that were true in the past but are no longer true. So China did have a one-child policy, but about 10 years ago, they changed it to a two.
And while it may peak in the coming few years, we're far, far away from getting rid of our dependency on black gold. But what do you think, though?
But we need that. But in order to get to the 50% reduction, we need another 30 points. So the gigafactory, by virtue of economies of scale, has to contribute that additional 30 points.
Do you agree with Elon Musk that oil demand is going to peak within the next 4 years?
But it took me a while to understand things that most people intuitively understand.
Do let me know in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.